Okay, so just after midnight on Tuesday morning, the Writers Guild of America approved a strike after negotiations failed with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers.
Now today, for the first time in 15 years, the union representing over 11,000 scripted TV and film writers across the country has once again gone on strike.
Now, that means some 11,500 people who write shows and movies will not be working. So, Mark, why don't you run through the basics of just what this strike means, why it happened?
Yeah, so there's really a very simple explanation for this, the streaming economy. And it gets a lot more complicated, but we'll keep it simple here at first.
Okay.
So everybody watches streaming now, not like in 2007, 2008, when everybody was still linear TV. Maybe you had TiVo or something like that. So streaming has meant that there's more content and more jobs for writers than there has ever been. It also means that production costs are actually higher. There's greater investments into shows than there really has ever been. All that said, the security and compensation for writers is not what it was even 15 or 20 years ago. According to Vox, the average pay for writers has actually declined 4% in the last 10 years. And then when you consider inflation, that seems like an even lower number. The median wage for somebody who works on a streaming show is about 46% of the median wage of someone working on a broadcast show.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of interesting because, as I was saying earlier, there's huge investments in streaming content. So why is it that they're making less? There's like a couple of fundamental ways, obviously, that streaming is different than linear TV. One of those, of course, is fewer episodes. House of Cards, which is one of the big first streaming only shows. There's, maybe 10 per season. Sometimes you might get 12. Sometimes it's only 7 or 8. Back in network TV heyday, you'd have like 24 episodes of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Dawson's Creek or whatever.
And 12 seasons.
Yes. And they would go on for a long time. Now you might get three or 4 seasons, and then Netflix usually cuts the cord. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those seasons are spread out. There's not like the same rhythm as there used to be, the September to May kind of season. And so that's really thrown things into flux. And another thing that's really thrown things into flux are residuals. And they were actually an issue back in 07, 08. So residuals they can again be fairly complicated, but a good way to think about it is that anytime that something airs on television, the person who had any involvement in writing it gets a little bit of money, sometimes a lot of money, depending on who they are. And when you had, like, for instance, a show like Friends, which was, mega successful, but even like lesser shows, they air for a first time and then they'll do reruns on the same network. And then oftentimes they'll be syndicated and they may air dozens to hundreds of more in a span of years. And you get a little bit of coin every time that happens. Now, on streamers, writers still get residuals, but they don't get as much. And it was a huge crux of their negotiations in 07, 08. And the writers, obviously, they ended up accepting a contract, but it wasn't what they wanted for residuals. And so that has continued to plague them, especially as streaming has gotten a lot more popular.
What are we hearing from kind of the other side? Are the execs saying anything? Are the companies saying anything?
Yeah, the major media companies have an interesting position, and they have kind of like pointed out correctly that they're under a lot of pressure right now. They are largely publicly traded companies. Netflix, for instance, Warner Brothers, Discovery, Disney. These are all massive, massive companies. And they've all not been doing all that well. Netflix's stock is about half of what it was at its peak, I think, of 2021. And it's actually gone up this year by a decent amount, but it's still kind of low. And Netflix was profitable last year, but basically none of the other streamers were. Disney, not profitable in its streaming business. Warner Brothers Discovery, not profitable, etc. And not only that, experts believe that we're talking 3-4 years. If everything goes well, those companies might become profitable at streaming. So having to start paying writers more money and make a lot of changes is just something that these companies don't feel like they can do. And of course, their excuse for that, though, is, well, that's just what our investors are telling us. So it all kind of comes down to like this, investors and the stock market and everything else. And even though they have been investing a lot in this content, they just have not been doing it in writers. So, I mean, both sides really have compelling arguments that they're making here.
What is this going to look like?
There will be no Jimmy Kimmel. There will be no Jimmy Fallon. There will be no Steve Colbert. late night is gone, probably for the foreseeable future until
maybe for the best.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't watch all of them all that much, but for people who still watch linear TV, it's going to look a little bit different. Saturday Night Live, which I watch basically every week, they will not have any more episodes of that until this writer strike is resolved, or until there's some other resolutions, maybe with their own writers, but that is unlikely to happen. So there will be no Saturday Night Live. Sitcoms that appear on network TV, like a lot of those, the writing has probably already been done for the ends of this season, so there wouldn't be a huge difference. But, they are already working on the seasons that start in the fall. And so those will be postponed, at least work on them. And so who knows what could happen in the long run with those. Now for like Netflix, for HBO Max, for people who really just watch streaming, they probably won't notice that much of a difference, at least at first. Ted Sarandos, CEO of Netflix, earlier this year had, everybody thought that this strike might be coming. There was a good chance of it, of course. And he said like, hey, we do not want this, but we think we're in a good position. Like they have just a lot of movies and TV shows on there. So they will probably be fine. And they'll probably be the most fine of all the companies just because of the amount of content that they've produced already. But that said, remember 100 days, that's a long time. And that's how long it lasted 15 years ago. And so in the coming months, maybe even weeks, then I think we will start to see a difference on Netflix. There's going to go in, and other streamers. There will be probably less new content. The shows that are out there probably won't be very good. I'll bring up kind of some of the things that happened in 07, 08 that some people may forget. Friday Night Lights was an extremely popular show at that time, and its second season was out. And the second season of it just ended like after episode 15, and it made no sense. And they just had to start season 3 with season 2 making no sense. And that just happened all over the place to TV shows. And we saw a rise of reality television because that's what networks were able to still do that. They couldn't pay writers, but they could still make reality TV. And I think that kind of had, depending on one's viewpoint, that was either bad for television or some people like that stuff. But essentially the quality goes down when these strikes happen. You've
heard this term a lot lately, but even in this industry, it's AI, right? It's also an issue here. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I mentioned earlier the residuals as being for streamers was this huge crux in like 15 years ago during the last strike. Well, no one was quite sure what streaming was going to look like. So they just kind of had to in some ways, predict the future with regards to their residuals. Right now, AI is like the equivalent of those residuals. Like no one's quite sure what it's going to be like in the future, but it's hovering right there in the air and people know it's going to have an impact. So, according to Vox, the Writers Guild in the negotiations so far, they've basically been demanding that a human being must involved with every script, and they've been demanding that every source material that is used to create like a show or a movie must come from a human being. So these are that's very simple, but it's likely to get more complex in these negotiations. But either way, it's kind of this thing where both sides are going to have to figure out the future without knowing what the future is going to be.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated topic because no one really knows what it's going to look like, obviously. So they're kind of placing bets on both sides. But I guess we'll see how this unfolds.
Yeah, and it could be a while.
It could be a while. All right, bada bing, bada boom. That's going to do it for us today, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the Hustle Daily Show. We're a proud part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. We've got a lot more tech and business coverage in our newsletter. If you're not subscribed, you can sign up at thehustle.co/email. Hope you have an awesome Wednesday. We'll catch you tomorrow.